At age 40, something remarkable happens inside a person. Something subtle but powerful enough to redirect the entire course of a life. It is the moment when the mind finally becomes tired of guessing, tired of drifting, tired of hoping life will sort itself out without deliberate action. At this stage, you've lived enough years to recognize patterns. Your own patterns, the world's patterns, and the consequences of both. You've seen opportunities come and go, sometimes slipping through your fingers not because you were unworthy, but because you were unprepared, uncertain, or undecided. 40 is not the age where dreams die. It is the age where clarity begins. You reach a level of maturity where excuses can no longer hide in the shadows because the results of your choices stand in plain sight. And for the first time, you realize that life isn't waiting on luck or talent or timing. Life is waiting on a decision from you. At 40, you understand that your life up to this point has been shaped less by circumstances and more by choices, both the ones you made and the ones you avoided. You begin to see that drifting is dangerous because it gives your future away to randomness, and randomness has no loyalty to your dreams. Age brings perspective, and perspective brings responsibility. You start to grasp that getting rich, financially, emotionally, spiritually, requires a deliberate shift from hoping to choosing. It means deciding what you will tolerate and what you will no longer accept. It means choosing growth over comfort, discipline over distraction, commitment over convenience. You recognize that the world doesn't reward the indecisive, it rewards the determined. And in this clarity, you finally understand that your results are not the product of fate, but the product of decisions you've been postponing for too long. This is the age where you stop believing that you have infinite time to figure things out. You begin to feel the weight of years behind you, not as a burden, but as a reminder that the future is not guaranteed, but it is still available. The urgency you feel isn't fear, it's awakening. At 40, your experiences form a foundation you didn't have in your 20s and 30s. You've made mistakes and paid for them. You've trusted the wrong people and learned from it. You've taken shortcuts and discovered they never save time, they only postpone consequences. But now this accumulation of lessons becomes fuel for wiser, stronger, more intentional decisions. You are no longer guessing which path to take. You can see the right path clearly. What was once confusion is now comprehension. What was once hesitation becomes conviction. When you reach 40, you stop searching for permission to change because you realize no one is coming to grant it. You understand that your success isn't waiting on the approval of your family, your friends, your past, or even your fears. It is waiting on you to finally decide who you want to become and what you're willing to do about it. The distractions that consumed you in your earlier years lose their appeal because you've lived long enough to see their cost. You know now that discipline is not punishment, it's liberation. You know that focus is not restriction, it's empowerment. And you understand that every meaningful transformation begins with a decision, a real decision, the kind that comes from a mature mind and a committed heart. At 40, you stop gambling with your future and start shaping it intentionally. You stop wishing for change and start choosing it. At age 40, you begin to understand that life is not just a series of days you live through, but a field you've been planting in for decades, often without realizing it. The habits you repeated, the disciplines you kept, and the comforts you chose over growth have all taken root, quietly shaping the results you now live with. You start to see that nothing in life just happens, and everything is an outcome of seeds planted long before. The habits you formed in your 20s and 30s did not disappear, they matured into patterns that either serve you or restrict you. And this realization is both humbling and empowering, because it reveals the truth that you are not a victim of your history, but the author of your habits. You begin to recognize that wealthy people aren't simply lucky, they cultivate habits that naturally lead to wealth. You also see that people who struggle often struggle not because they lack intelligence, but because they lacked consistent habits that compound. And in that moment, you discover that at 40, your habits are your harvest. But the gift of being 40 is the wisdom to plant better seeds with full awareness of the outcome they will produce. Unlike your younger years, you no longer guess what discipline will do because you've already seen the cost of not having it. You no longer wonder whether small daily improvements matter because you've lived long enough to watch small neglect turn into large problems. At this age, you gain the clarity to understand that starting a new habit is not about perfection, but about direction. You see that wealth is not the result of a single decision, but the accumulation of better decisions repeated consistently. And now, with maturity, you have the patience to stick to what works instead of jumping from idea to idea. You finally appreciate the power of routine, the stability of structure, and the freedom that comes from responsibility. You begin to replant your life with intention, knowing that the next harvest depends entirely on what you choose to sow now. You realize that your habits do not only influence your finances, but they shape your confidence, your energy, your mindset, and your opportunities. A person with strong habits radiates reliability, and reliability attracts trust, partnership, and possibility. You see that disciplined people win not because they are better, but because they show up when others stop. You understand that wealth is attracted to order, consistency, and clarity, qualities that only strong habits can create. And as you look back at the years behind you, you become grateful for the lessons hidden in your failures, because they taught you what kind of habits you must build now. At 40, you stop glamorizing overnight success and start valuing long-term consistency. You finally see that the boring habits are the ones that build extraordinary outcomes. You realize that your routine is your future written in advance. And in that awareness, you commit to shaping a lifestyle that makes wealth not just possible, but inevitable. At this stage of life, you also understand that changing habits is not an act of force, but an act of identity. You stop saying, "I want to be rich," and start asking, "Who must I become to live richly?" You see that wealth is not just an outcome, but a reflection of your daily choices, from how you spend your time to how you manage your money, your emotions, and your environment. You recognize that habits either expand your potential or drain your possibility. You begin to remove the habits that sabotage you, not out of guilt, but out of clarity. You add habits that strengthen you, not because they are easy, but because they are necessary. And as you rebuild your routine with intention, you discover a new level of confidence, the confidence that comes from knowing that each day you are planting seeds that guarantee a better future. At 40, you don't wait for life to give you a harvest. You create it through the habits you choose every single day. At 40, you begin to see with absolute clarity that the people around you are not just part of your environment. They are shaping your thinking, influencing your behavior, and quietly defining the quality of your future. You realize that every conversation either lifts your vision or lowers your ambition. The countless hours spent with people who complained, doubted, or feared suddenly reveal themselves as lost opportunities to grow. You start to understand that no one rises above the expectations of their circle, and no one becomes wealthy while surrounded by minds that reject wealth. At this age, you've lived long enough to see how associations can pull you forward or hold you back. You've witnessed how small-minded environments can shrink big dreams, and how inspired company can awaken ideas you didn't know you had. You recognize that the people you choose now will either multiply your potential or diminish it. And with this maturity, you begin to protect your mind as if your future depends on it. Because it does, this is the age where you begin to sort your relationships with purpose rather than emotion. You start noticing patterns you once ignored. You see how some people drain your energy while others fuel your ambition. You see how some conversations spiral into problems while others spark possibilities. And for the first time, you understand deeply that success is easier when you walk with people who expect more from you than you expect from yourself. You stop feeling guilty about distancing yourself from negativity because you see the price you paid for it in your earlier years. You realize that environment is stronger than willpower, and even the most determined person can be worn down by the wrong circle. At 40, you become intentional about who you listen to, who you learn from, and who you let influence your decisions. You start to choose your associations based on your future, not your past. You also recognize that your network is not just a collection of people, it is a reflection of your standards. Wealthy people associate with those who encourage growth, who celebrate progress, who offer insight instead of envy. Struggling people often gather around shared frustration, shared excuses, and shared limitation. And at 40, you finally see the difference with undeniable clarity. You realize that every step toward wealth requires you to elevate your environment. You become aware that the people you admire think differently, speak differently, and act differently from those who accept an average life. You notice how successful people discuss ideas, goals, and opportunities, while unsuccessful people discuss problems, distractions, and other people. You start to drift naturally toward those who inspire you because their energy aligns with the life you are ready to build. You understand that the right network is not just helpful, it is transformational. At this stage in life, you begin to value connection over crowd, wisdom over noise, and quality over quantity. You become selective not because you're arrogant, but because you finally know your worth. You learn that your inner circle must be filled with people who challenge your excuses, not comfort them. You appreciate those who hold you accountable because they care about your growth, not your comfort. You realize that true friends are not the ones who keep you the same, they're the ones who push you to evolve. At 40, you stop chasing relationships that cost you your peace or limit your progress. You begin to create space for mentors, partners, and peers who are building, growing, and striving. You discover that the greatest investment you can make at this age is not only in your skills or your habits, but in the people who shape your thinking every single day. You understand now, more than ever, that your network truly becomes your net worth. At 40, time begins to speak to you differently, not as a warning, but as a reminder of how precious every moment has become. You start to feel the weight of years behind you, not with regret, but with a new understanding that time is no longer something to casually spend. You've lived long enough to know how quickly a decade can disappear, how easily a dream can fade when postponed, and how costly indecision becomes when measured in years instead of days. This awareness sharpens your focus and gives you a seriousness that wasn't present in your 20s or 30s. You begin to use your time purposefully because you finally discovered that unfocused years produce unfocused results. You realize that every hour spent in distractions steals a piece of your future. You learn that time cannot be stored, borrowed, or recovered. It can only be invested. And with that realization, you start to treat time like the most valuable currency you possess. You begin to guard it, direct it, and multiply it with intention. At this age, you finally understand that time is the great equalizer. It gives everyone the same amount each day, but it rewards only those who use it wisely. You start to see that time is not your enemy. Wasted time is. You stop arguing with the clock and start cooperating with it, using structure and discipline to turn scattered effort into compounding progress. You become more aware of the small daily choices that determine the direction of your life. You recognize how easily time slips through your fingers when you allow distractions, excuses, or old habits to dominate your schedule. Instead of rushing, you begin to prioritize. Instead of multitasking, you begin to focus. Instead of wishing for more time, you begin to use the time you have with greater intelligence. And with this new respect for time, you notice that your productivity increases, your clarity strengthens, and your life begins to move forward with a momentum you never felt before. You also begin to understand that urgency is not pressure, it is power. Urgency gives your goals strength, direction, and meaning. When you feel the urgency of time, you stop postponing decisions that could change your life. You stop assuming you can start someday, because you now know someday never arrives. You start now because now is the only time that guarantees progress. At 40, the clock becomes a mentor instead of a threat. It teaches you to value your mornings, discipline your evenings, and protect the hours in between. It teaches you that every minute spent learning compounds into opportunity, every minute spent creating compounds into confidence, and every minute spent improving yourself compounds into wealth. You begin to realize that people who master time eventually master results. And at this age, you choose to live intentionally because you finally understand that when you respect time, time rewards you in ways that money never could.